and welcome to Spookbox, the only podcast where three housemates do a cost-benefit analysis of cult death sacrifices to the sun. This week, as always, I'm joined by Conor.
Hello.
And Daf.
Hi, Spookboxers.
And we're looking at 2019's Midsommar by Ari Aster, a movie about a neo-pagan summer festival in contemporary Sweden, death and contaminated pies. Before we dive into a plot summary, I'm going to ask you to listen to your intuition in the style of the Horga cult and tell me, what genre is this movie?
Oh my god, we're not going for general opinions first?
We're going straight into what do we think this film is? That's a big question.
That is a general opinion, but through intuition.
I don't have intuition.
I don't think we'll be able to get you some in time for this podcast.
Get on AliExpress.
I intuit that it's a horror film, but it's a subversive horror film. Okay. And I think that's fine.
Subversive horror.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I can go into that, but we'll save it.
I mean, I'm not asking whether you guys like it or not, because of course you do. You know?
Yeah.
I figured.
Sure.
Yeah, so
absolutely.
It's a subversive horror.
Yes, I think so.
On one side.
Yes.
On the other side,
It's a romance.
it's a romance.
It's a romance, completely, 100%. No, I don't know. Is it? I've been really struggling with this since I saw it in the cinema. I told really good friends of mine to go see the film, and they reported back the same thing. Every friend I told to go see it came back and said, "Yeah, I liked it, but it wasn't scary."
This is exactly the same thing that I've seen. So I was doing some research for this.
Nice.
And a lot of the detractors of the film just say, it's the same with any film. It's the same when you tell, probably the same when Blair Witch came out, or sort of some of these other pivotal horror films. Some people just don't think they're scary and therefore not really worth the time of day. I'm
scared by the idea of someone who isn't scared by Blair Witch Project. Like, who is that person? I want to meet them. Like, they're terrifying to me. But that's a awfully scary film.
To a degree, I think it's. I mean, people also said about The Shining that they didn't like. If you watch The Shining now, people don't think it's scary. I mean, I don't think people thought it was scary at the time either. A lot of people didn't anyway.
I have this feeling about some. Oh, sorry, man. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, what were you saying?
I have this feeling about certain films, certain like psychological horrors. I saw, what do you call it? Not Psycho, the Hitchcock one where he's looking out the window.
Rear Window.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And so he's looking out the window and sees all the things and thinks it might be a murder, but it's playing with whether it could be a murder or if he's just paranoid, but then finds out that it actually is a murder. And I remember watching the film and going, brilliant. What a laugh.
What a farce.
And then it was only when a friend of mine turned around and went, "Do you not get why it's scary?" And I was like, "No, it's not scary at all." And I'm like, "It is scary. It's scary because he was right. There was a murder going on. Yeah. You could be looking out at anybody and you might be looking at a potential murderer. You know, every human being is a psychopath. And, you know, the same sort of thing happened with Perfect Blue last week where, you know, I had convinced myself that, you know, being stalked is a terrible thing to happen. And then, you know, we sort of dropped that bomb that it, you know, there are worse things under the sun, you know, so.
I don't think I was answerable to anyone last week. I was deeply menstruating and I had
on theme.
A mad track like Charlie from Always Sunny pinboard up about what stalkers mean in 2020, and I've now taken that pinboard down.
Oh, amazing.
And I'm recovering from my madcap theories.
But you know, though, is this film a horror? I'm tempted. I think it's actually working at a different level. I think this film isn't just a subversive horror. I feel like I'm now just trying to one up you. Like,
no, go for it, please do.
It's not just a subversive horror. I think this is a film that uses elements of the horror genre to end to the ends of humor or to the ends of some maybe philosophical thought or some kind of gag about modern anthropology or something. Honestly, I think it's a very dark comedy.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, but I think my understanding of what a subversive horror film would be that I feel like there's a lot in this film that comes from horror. It draws from horror, I think.
Right.
So it draws from this fascination with cults, this fascination with paganism, and in sort of the folk horror films like The Wicker Man or The Borderlines, I think is what it was called. The cult is always the villain.
Right.
But the thing with this film is that the cult is still sort of the villain. It is still killing people, but we're being asked as an audience to... We get something that we don't usually get in other horror films, that is in that we're privy to the motivations, I think,
Yes.
of the villain. And
Yeah.
I think, as I was saying the other day, it's like... It's a Friday the 13th film, if from the point of view of Jason, almost.
All right.
It's like we're being asked to understand where they're coming from, and to a
Yes.
degree that sort of made me very conflicted anyway, because it made me question the sort of how different societies view death, I guess.
Yeah. So we were just chatting about this earlier. I think that comes down to sort of, I've been all over the block with this film, trying to think about what it means and how much I like it. Because when I first saw it, absolutely adored it, told everyone I knew to go see it. Now I've seen it 3 times. Quick note, none of us have seen the director's cut, right?
No. That is widely available, though, right?
Apparently it's widely
Apparently
available.
it's out there. There are trailers online anyway.
Yeah, well, from where we get our films from, the reputable source that gives us all our films.
Absolutely.
You
There's
wouldn't download a car. Mate, yes, I would.
There's a magical,
Yes, I
mystical
would.
video shop around the corner that's somehow still open.
Yeah, it's brilliant. The blockbuster of the internet. They didn't have it, so we haven't seen the director's cut. But I do know that there's still some scenes that were missing in it that were in the trailer. But yeah, I mean, I've been trying to think about what this film might mean in sort of grand terms. But yeah, I've come down on it into this one, concrete reading that I hopefully will come up naturally throughout the questions.
Yeah,
but,
we're going to return to horror. We're going to return to Ari Aster and what his intentions were. We're going to return to America and Sweden. We're going to get down to all of those details.
Ooh.
But first, should we do a plot summary?
Love a
Why
plot
not?
summary.
Okay. So, Danny, played by Florence Pugh, is a college student grieving her sister's murder-suicide with her parents, relying on her reluctant and myopic boyfriend Christian and their already strained relationship for support. Christian and fellow anthropology grad student pals Josh and Mark are invited to Sweden for a special midsummer celebration by their friend Pelle. Unable to leave Danny out of obligation to her and her recent tragic loss, Christian brings her along. Upon arriving at the rural Hurga cult in Sweden, the sun hardly sets, people wear all white, and psychedelic mushrooms are on offer. The group meet fellow outsiders Connie and Simon, who have travelled from London upon a similar invite from Ingmar, Pelle's communal brother. They collectively witness the first Hurga ritual, where 2 elders commit suicide by leaping off a cliff top. Horrified, Connie and Simon try to leave, but bizarrely, Connie is told Simon has already left without her when she goes to collect her bags. Then, Danny fights hallucinations of the tragic deaths of her sister and parents. Meanwhile, Christian is focused on the question of his thesis and decides to do it on the Hurga, copying Josh and causing a rift between the two. Christian eats a pie spiked with cult member Maya's pubic hair. Mark accidentally pees on a Hurga ancestral tree, inciting the fury of the cult, and then is lured off by a female cult member at dinner. At night, Josh sneaks to the temple to photograph the cult's sacred text when he sees a nude man wearing Mark's skinned face and is hit over the head, after which his body is dragged away. The next day, Danny is led by female members of the cult into a maypole dancing competition. Trance-like, Danny wins and is crowned as the esteemed May Queen. Christian is coerced into taking more drugs before a sex rite designed to impregnate Maya, while other naked female cultists sing and watch. After discovering Christian with Maya, Danny has a panic attack and the Hurga women wail with her empathetically. A shocked and disorientated Christian then runs off, discovering Josh's leg, and then Simon, who has been ritually dismembered as a blood eagle. More on that later. Christian is then paralysed by an elder. The cult explains that to purge the commune of its evil, 9 human sacrifices must be offered. The first 4 victims are outsiders lured to them by the insight of Pelle and Ingmar. Josh, Mark, Connie and Simon. The next 4 victims are cult members, 2 sacrificed elders, the participants of the cliff death, and 2 volunteers, Ingmar and Ulf. As May Queen, Danny must choose the 9th and final victim, either Christian or a villager. She chooses to sacrifice Christian. Still paralysed, he is stuffed into a disemboweled bear and placed in a temple alongside the other sacrifices. The temple is set on fire and the cult celebrates. At first, Danny sobs in horror, but gradually smiles. So that is our plot summary, guys.
What an ending.
Well, should we turn to the question of genre, which we've touched upon a little? I was reading about what Ari Aster said about the film. Initially, he was pitched it by a Swedish production company, and it was a simple cult horror film. And after experiencing a breakup himself, he decided to rewrite the script with the breakup element part of it. So he describes Midsommar as a breakup movie dressed in the clothes of a folk horror film. So what do you think is achieved in the breakup genre by dragging up his movie as horror?
A breakup movie?
Absolutely it is. Yeah.
What?
He's quite elusive in interviews. So I watched one just before we started recording. And I think one of the things that he is, in all of his interviews, he seems adamant that it is a breakup movie.
That's hilarious. What's a breakup movie?
I mean, in this context, I think a breakup movie is...
No, like, what... name one.
Okay, a breakup movie, The Breakup. How's that?
I've never seen it. What happens in the... Well, I guess people break up in the breakup. Is there a famous one?
I mean, breakup movies... I think go hand in hand with romantic comedy films, right?
There's usually a breakup in them.
A lot of breakups happen in them.
Yes.
I don't think we need
500 Days of Summer.
That's a breakup.
Perfect.
500 Days of Summer.
Eternal Sunshine.
We don't need
That's
the
a breakup
conclusion to be, them together or apart, but breaking up takes place in the main part of the film.
I think as long as it involves some kind of processing of a breakup.
Who would die in 500 Days of Summer if we did a horror version of 500 Days of Summer?
Probably, I think Gordon Levitt would have to go.
It is to do with summer, midsummer, like...
Oh my god.
Ritual.
500 Days of Midsommar.
Autumn. Like, I think Summer gets sacrificed in 500 Days, but I'm okay with that because she's not really a full character.
No, that's a good point, yeah.
Fine.
That doesn't really count as a sacrifice then.
Okay, so now we know what a breakup movie is. Do we gain anything from this being a breakup film dressed up as a horror film? For example, I think that the visceral discomfort and pain you can feel from some of the scenes in the movie kind of allow you to embody the feeling of a breakup. Sometimes you experience physical pain. I mean, people have been known to like die of heartbreak, that kind of thing. So the way that the horror genre manipulates your emotion and your mood is maybe a really good tool to be available to the director when they're putting forward a breakup film.
What do you think? I think one of the things that you go through when you have a real life breakup is that you do seek community, I guess.
Yeah.
One of the things that helps you process
and you seek the new, as scary as it might be, change has to take place.
I think that maybe that's the dark comedy element, really, is that if she's going through if Danny is going through a failed relationship with Christian, it takes a friendship group to help her realize that she's okay by herself. It just so happens that the community that she's found happens to be a death cult. Yeah. Right?
Who isn't?
Who isn't these days, right?
Everyone's got their quirks, right?
So yeah, I don't know. I think that's the dark comedy element playing in all of this. Yeah. And it just so happens to be a sort of folk horror setting, I think.
There's a couple of things that annoy me about that. The first one is at the beginning of the movie, we see that Danny does have a friend.
That's right.
She's on the phone to a friend.
But I think that speaks to like contemporary American culture or millennial culture where, yes, she has a friend, but the friend isn't physically present with her. The comfort takes place over the phone. And even the fact that it's a phone call is kind of weird. Like, you know, that's quite intimate for
Yeah,
for our
what's-
generation.
anymore?
WhatsApp me.
I'm like, wow. So she was so ready for that.
Does she talk on the phone? I don't remember this bit. Does she talk on the
Talks
phone?
on the phone.
Do we hear
Yeah.
the voice of the other
Absolute
person?
freak.
Oh, I don't think so.
We don't hear Christian's voice on the phone.
No, she's talking to her friend for sure because
Right,
she
right, right.
complains
We-
about Christian.
Do hear Christian's voice on the phone at the beginning phone call, and I remember this because
Like that.
that would be great if he sounded like
What
were those-
adults from Peanuts?
What was the name of those little things, the little pink dudes that lived on the moon? It's
Clanger.
the clangers. If Christian's voice was a clanger. Anyway, sorry.
I'm scared. She's really acting. You just please stop doing that voice.
Okay. No. Okay. We definitely hear Christian's voice, and I remember this because Christian responds to Danny saying "I love you" by like exhaling his vape.
yeah, you're completely right. Yeah,
like-
that's right. Yeah, she says it twice, and the first time he goes, "I love you," and then she says it a second time, and he's like, "Okay," as they're hanging up.
And like, so that's the thing. Yeah. So this is a breakup movie, I guess. And the thing is, Christian is painted as a total douche, but in the director's cut, it's like he's. Oh, no. In the theatrical cut, he's like more. He's just a douche, you know. He's just like kind of a, you know, an asshole because he's really schlubby. He doesn't care, but
He's out of his depth, but his depth isn't very deep.
He's out of his depth, but he's
Yeah.
a shallow person
Yeah.
in the first place, you know. But he's not a bad person, you know. He just is. He's just a. Well, he is a bad person because he's so mediocre.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. Whereas what I've heard is that in the director's cut, it becomes more clear that he is like intentionally a jerk. That there's some more scenes where he is like gaslighting Danny.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And-
read about that. Like, I read that he comes across as like a gaslighter, but I don't think we get that from the main release.
And I think we should restrict our conversation to
Yeah.
the main release. You
Yeah,
know what
sure.
I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what I heard was that when Aster saw the theatrical cut, he was like, "Oh, my movie's too long. Like, I don't need all of the stuff I thought I needed. Like, this actually works."
It's
second
interesting that he
feature.
maybe leaned more heavily on the breakup moments than his cut because
Yeah.
that was his interest in making the movie.
Yeah.
Perhaps, yeah.
But I think for me, I don't really like it as a breakup movie because to me, it's less about Danny's relationship with this schlubby dude Christian and more about her relationship to death. You know, her relationship to the death of her parents and the death of her sister.
I think that is a really good point. Like, you know, she's became an orphan and she's having to process what family means.
Yeah.
And in a previous context, like Christian would have been her proto family. You know, he was the next person she could turn to after her family died. But he doesn't prove to be capable of that. So it's about seeking that kind of belonging. Like, we all go out there and try to make our own family. But
I've just done what I always do on this goddamn show, which is that I'll start talking about something, I'll get my point out there, and then I'll realize that I don't believe what I just said.
you don't believe it's about her relationship with death?
No, I do.
think
I
it is.
definitely do. But what I've just realized is that 500 Days of Summer has nothing to do
It's
with...
a horror film.
Yes, we need to make 500 Days of Midsommar. Like, we need to have, like...
We'll start a sort of comedy YouTube channel where we re-edit trailers. How's that?
What you got, and it might be hard. Anyway, no, what I've realized is that 500 Days of Summer is... you know, has a greater depth to it, you know, or more, I've remembered that it has that greater depth to it. It's more about him coming to terms with, you know, his aspirations because he's a trained architect or something.
I think it's been a very long time since I've seen it, but that rings a bell.
Or he wanted to become an architect at some point, but then he just started working in greetings cards. And then at the end of the film, he decides to go back and finish becoming an architect or whatever. Oh, white people problem. And then he meets a girl at the end of the movie called like Autumn or Spring or something. Yeah. He's like, "Hey, what's your name?" "My name's Autumn." I was like, no.
I feel
Does he look in the
like-
camera like sort of
Yes.
Kevin from Home Alone? credits.
To bring it back to Christian, like, he's a very lukewarm person. Like, he doesn't have a lot of individuality. He doesn't know what his thesis is going to be.
No.
He's constantly
He's a coaster.
affirmed by all of his bros around him, like telling him what to do. And I think that in like contemporary American culture, that's a very unattractive thing because, you know, it's not really accepted that you wouldn't be an individual. You are forced to be an individual. And when people are forced to be an individual by their context, they are a bit of a sham person. Like, he just isn't a very individualistic person.
No.
He doesn't have a lot about him. And in the context of the Hurga, that would be totally fine. But in America, he's like, it turns him into a bit of a monster almost. Like,
Whoa.
Or just sort of inept, I guess.
yeah.
You think he would fit in with the Hurga?
I think that there's like a cultural contrast there. Like, somebody like Christian is eaten alive by the like pressures to be individualistic and important, because he really wants to have the best thesis. He wants to have all the girls that he can. He feels tied down by Danny. Like, he wants, you know, just excess, and he wants to be important as opposed to just being grateful for what he has and living a bit of a simpler life.
You can also
Do
be
you see
more
what I mean?
empathetic, I guess, as well.
Yeah, he doesn't have empathy, so he's a very like individualistic person.
You see, that's the thing. So he doesn't have empathy. So that's why, like, so you're right. He's not an individualistic person. So that's why he makes it like second to last. Do you know what I mean? Like,
What do you mean?
so, you know, if like he's the second last one.
Well, he nearly survives.
He nearly survives.
Do you see what I mean? Like, he nearly does fit in with the Hurga.
If he had just been a bit more open, like,
If he'd been a bit more open as a person, like, maybe Danny would have said, like, right, I don't want to date you anymore. Oh my God, our postman always delivers when we're recording a
I'll get it.
podcast. I think we should invite our postman onto
I think
the
this
podcast
needs
next
to become
week.
a new segment, you know?
What's
okay.
the postman
What's
brought?
in the mail?
Okay, quick pause, everyone. Fill up your coffee cup. Let's
What is
find
in the
out
mail today?
what's in the mail today. Who is it for? It's probably a 70% chance that it's Conor.
It's always for me.
Yeah.
But no, okay. Actually, what's weird is today we are getting a parcel from Finland. So, you know, we're bringing...
Oh my God,
we're
all
bringing,
those northern countries are just the same, right?
We're bringing, you know, Scandinavian energy in, although I know Finland isn't part of Scandinavia. No, that's a really interesting point, because, yeah, okay, so again, this is the contrast between, like, director's cut and theatrical cut Christian, like...
He's a worse guy in the, like, proto version of the film.
Exactly, but in the film that was actually released, you know, I feel like in the film that was released, we don't see we don't see Danny's decision to sacrifice Christian as an act of revenge necessarily. Instead, we see Danny makes the decision to kill Christian, I feel, in the theatrical release as kind of a bringing on catharsis, as in, like, Christian, you're the last remnant of my old life here. I'm okay to let you go.
Especially in the context of the cult leader saying, you know, we do this to purge evil. Like, it's an honoring to the sun, but we also, the bear figure is symbolic of evil entreating on their community. So they burn someone in the bear costume to kind of symbolically purge evil from the community. So in that context, Danny is looking at the last remnants of her old life. You know, Christian even ties into her family and their death. He was the one that was there after she found out. So all of that has happened to her, she can just cut her past right off. So it's definitely like a sort of catharsis, a purging when she kills him. You could read it as revenge, but I see it more in that light too.
That's why I think it is sort of a breakup movie, because in a lot of breakup movies, the breakup happens and the realization of the main character at the end is that they didn't actually need the relationship in the first place.
Yeah.
And what they needed to do was just sort of rebirth themselves.
People also burn objects to do with their ex a lot. Like in Friends, they have to get the fire brigade out because they accidentally start a fire trying to burn, I'm pretty sure it's Monica's ex's stuff.
I think the
Okay.
three of them
The
all
three
have
of them,
stuff
and they're
in
in
that
wedding
big trash can.
dresses, and that makes me think of Midsommar because she's wearing the big flowery dress and she's literally burning her ex. Like,
Friends,
I think
500
that
Days of Summer. It's...
Americans have tried to make like their own like contemporary ritual, and one of them, I feel like it is burning your ex's stuff. So she burns her ex. That's kind of funny.
That's kind of funny.
I wanted to then talk about like the fact that this movie is a co-production between Sweden and the US, and what do you think the film says about both cultures or either culture? The way that I've seen it received in Sweden is it ranges from the fact that it's offensive and exoticizing Sweden, and to the fact that the accents were rendered quite well. I mean, and the dialect. What does everyone think? Obviously, this is a very fantastical version of a cult. But do you think that there's anything bigger to be said about American culture or potentially Swedish culture and those two interacting?
Well, so one of the first things that I thought about when I thought about the fact that this was based in Sweden, an American and Swedish production, was that how often do we really see Sweden as the setting of a folk horror film? I don't think very often, because
Not
usually...
very often. There's another film which is really good. You should check it out, called The Ritual.
Yeah, right.
Which is on
I've heard of that.
Netflix.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that's set on a hiking trip to Sweden. But it's a very rare thing. I agree.
But I think as well, a lot of folk horror films we tend to see made in the UK,
Yes.
or made exclusively in the US, and they specifically grapple almost with a sort of post-colonial context. They grapple with the idea that in the US context that their land is essentially stolen, and that land will eventually reclaim.
And it's haunted in that sense.
Yeah, and it's haunted. In the UK, I think it's usually used sort of metaphorized to a certain extent. The loss of sort of pre-Christian ideas of community.
Now, in this sense, this is a pre-Christian community,
Exactly. But I
but
think-
one that has remained intact. So there's not the
Yes.
loss element. Is there the element of what if?
A little bit, but I think one of the interesting things about it is that if in American folk horror films, like, I'm sort of drawing a blank on what that would be. I mean, I guess like The Witch is sort of a folk horror film.
Yeah.
They always grapple with sort of the old world.
Yeah.
And in a sense, because a lot of the pagan practices that the UK used to have are sort of borrowed from Nordic countries,
Yeah.
usually. Correct me if I'm
Well,
wrong. We have a
well,
corrections
Viking
segment.
culture was
Sure.
a pagan religion.
Yeah.
And, you know, what I've read about it is that it's really hard to find any kind of information on pre-Christian Scotland, at least, other than what was actually Viking culture brought here.
Yeah.
So when we think about like pagan pre-Christian culture in Scotland, at least, it is Viking culture.
Right. So the thing I think we achieve from basing this in Sweden is that it makes the US seem all the more remote, because this is sort of, because just as you're saying, it's intact, it's tied to an even a past even further back.
That's right.
Right.
There was no disruption in
Yeah.
that sense. Yeah.
I just, there's a couple of things like thinking about Swedish culture. So I know this is more Norwegian than Swedish, but there's a thing in Scandinavian culture in general of, you know, of things being just enough.
Oh, yeah.
The guys in Ylvis, Norwegian, struggled with this a lot because they had that international fame, and then were asked, like, how do you feel about your international fame? And they're like, well, it's, you know,
Are you talking about What Does the Fox Say?
what does the fox say?
What does the fox say?
And the fox said, you were okay with fame,
Okay.
but, you know, we're sure it'll pass over.
Everybody.
And the
You
word
know.
in question, I'm pretty sure it's a Swedish word, it's lagom.
I think that's it, right?
Yeah. And
Meaning what?
London-based publishers have seized on this to sell it to unhappy British people. Thank you again
So
for telling us how to be happy.
the bit that I found really funny in that regard then was there's a small part where the 72-year-olds are given torches before they're at the stupa, sign aside, and the head of ceremonies says, "This is your flame, this high, no higher." So, like, you have a flame and it's burning bright, but you raise it this high, and then you stop.
Right.
Whereas, you know, we get platitudes about Americans in the movie, like Pele says to Christian, "Oh, you're an American, just ram yourself in." There's the idea of you being, you know, out of place, too much, abrasive, forceful, all of these qualities.
Life is yours for the taking.
Whereas the idea of balance is much more present in the Horga community.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. But then I think, again, this kind of returns to the kind of trolly, pranky, comedy kind of root of the movie
which we can't forget.
Where I think the whole thing is kind of a joke about US perceptions of European culture. Like,
it ridicules how much they inflate and exoticize something that is seen as like pre-American.
Almost, right? So it's like,
primitive. I mean,
it's like, you know, so there's that statistic about how few Americans actually travel abroad, and the romanticization of Europe as the old country, as you were saying. You know, so then there's this idea of the imagination of like, oh, I wonder how different it is over there. You know, I wonder what they're like. There's, you know, our savage ancestors. You know, so I feel like it's kind of taking the piss in that regard of, you know, imagine what an American thinks a Swedish person must be like. They're probably dressed in these white robes all the time.
And the narrative device of them being anthropology grads and the anthropologist project being part of the story, I think really zones in on that. You know, the idea that every American abroad behaves like an anthropologist almost.
And I really fell for that whole anthropology angle when I first saw the film. You know, I thought like, that must be a clue. I must need to use, you know, anthropological theory to really understand this film fully. Like, it must have something to do with like these cultural divisions and divides. It must have something to do with that. And, you know, I really tried to understand the film from a perspective of like community. You know, in terms of what definitions of community might be, referencing things like Marcel Mauss, like gifting communities, magic communities. They even bring up the idea of taboo.
Yes, because even they have taboos.
Which is
like pissing on the tree, or what?
Well, there was
something
something else that I can't remember.
Well, one of the Harga says, "We respect the incest taboo."
That's right. Yeah.
Oh,
Although even that has limits, apparently.
Yes,
as we find out later on with the oracle.
Yeah, so they in two scenes that are almost back to back, they say we respect the incest taboo, and then they explain that the oracle of the cult is the product of incest. So it's like they know stuff, but they are maybe just not telling the truth.
Right.
Or the truth is more complicated or something. And so I really tried to understand the film through these lenses to try and think like, is Aster trying to say the US is corrupt and we have broken social order in the contemporary United States, and what we need to do to fix that social order is return to a previous age of restoring connectivity. You know, I'm 90% sure that I've seen a reading of the film on YouTube. I think it might even be Wisecrack did this, and it makes me cringe. And I love Wisecrack, but they do a reading of the film that basically says the beginning of the movie where Dani's on her phone and trying to connect with people through her phone is like being criticized by the greater sense of connection that the Horga have together, where they're able to like hold each other and touch each other physically. So the film is trying to say, get off your phones.
Was that what you took from that reading? From Wisecrack's reading?
I might be misremembering it.
I watched that before this and I thought, that does seem awfully simplistic.
Now, I don't think that phones are the central point of contention, actually, but I do think that American contemporary society is criticised. But to disagree with the phone thing. I mean, Pele is showing photos of the Midsommar Festival on his phone to Danny. Like, so we have clear documentation that he takes photos at Midsommar with a mobile. And we also hear from a female cult member that the kids are watching Austin Powers at one point. I think that
such a good joke.
That was a great bit.
I think Ari Aster is intentionally trying to say, like, don't make any like big technology claims about this. I think it's more about human empathy, balance, relationships, and all of those things can be discussed without necessarily looking at the technology question.
That's true. I think it does. It does have this really convincing way of showing that there's nothing necessarily primitive about the cult. Yeah, because I mean, the fact that they watch Austin Powers, I mean, I don't know, maybe that does seem like primitive.
That's quite primitive.
That's advanced. What are you talking about? That's Scottish accent.
We haven't even learned how to appreciate Austin Powers yet.
So then, if the cult isn't primitive in a sense, what do you think the killing of outsiders means to the Horga?
I'm so glad you asked. Yes.
I'm really glad that you asked too, because I think... you go first, Conor, because I can't think of what it is now.
No. My answer is like so good that it's gonna like blow everybody else away. So like So
you go first, and so I can maybe
okay
get back at you.
Okay, low key, I was hoping that you would go first so that I could get a chance to like get my thoughts together. Okay, so I don't fully have this worked out in my head yet, but basically, I think that the death thing in the film is the main theme. For a while I thought it was to do with community, and then I really tried to like put it through the ringer. I was like, I was thinking, is this meant to be, some sort of reflection on Mauser's ideas of like magic in society, reflecting on how they use the drugs in the Horga, thinking, there's that scene that was in the trailer, but was cut from the film, of levitation. So I think maybe magic was a theme in the film once upon a time, but it got cut.
It's maybe just there is a texture now.
A texture. That's a really nice way of putting it. Yeah. But then the more I thought about the movie, the more I kept coming back to death. Okay, it really is all about death, and then importantly, rebirth, which I think is the bit of this puzzle that I still haven't quite figured out yet.
Wow, yeah, people aren't talking about that enough. But there's like Danny's rebirth, but also the fact that the cult believe in rebirth.
I think the rebirth thing is actually like a meta joke to the Ari Aster cinematic universe. This is my working theory. I'm happy to expand on that in a bit, but
of like rebirth as a director doing their sophomore film.
I'll get back to it. I will get back to it. Okay, but death in Midsommar as just Midsommar. I think it's super important, but what is happening is it's less to do with like anthropological ideas of death, where you can have different ideas of death all around the world, and I think instead it's about ethics. For me, the film is like a first-year philosophy classroom, and I think we've all been there, where someone starts talking about ethical, moral absolutism, and some smartass in the class will raise their hand and say, yeah, but there are some things that everyone can just agree are bad. No one in the world thinks that murder is a good thing. And they'll think that that's their slam dunk,
Drop mic.
Usually that person is American. No offense. But then there's then always someone else who, did sociology as an A-level or whatever, who's going, no, that's not true. Lots of societies out there in the world have got very complicated views of death, and even if they didn't exist philosophically, it would be the easiest thing, in a logical sense, to just say, let's not view death as a bad thing. So I think that that's the thing in the film, is that death is not a bad thing to these people. That's their ethical system that is happening. So the reason that these outsiders are being killed is that they're fitting into the machine, the natural machine that Pele references. He's saying, nature knows instinctively how to keep itself in balance. And I think that that's the way the Harga see it, is that these outsiders are just playing their role in this sacrifice, that they are fitting into it the same way as anyone else. So when Mark pisses on the tree, and like that, upsets the Horga, but at the same time, he then fits into the machine because then
As the fool.
he becomes the fool.
That's right, yeah.
So then they flay the fool, when the researcher takes the picture of the book, that sucks, but then that's his part in the machine. And it could be like a reflection on cinema and how like people all play their parts, but I think it's more about, the central conceit of this film is just what would happen if there was a society of people that viewed death entirely differently than we view death, So at the beginning of the movie, Dani sees the death of her sister and the death of her parents as this great tragedy, as something to really, not to mourn, because mourn is something that we do that's very healthy. We have to mourn things, but, instead to almost feel a kind of guilt about, or to see as a suffering, to see as a personal attack on her in a way, that she's like has to carry the burden of her family dying because she can't even talk about it. It's like it's something she tries to hide and conceal. But then as the film progresses and she meets the Horga, they see death as something that everyone has to be involved with and is to be celebrated. When we look at the Blood Eagle with Simon, they have put flowers in his eyes. They've dressed him up in this wonderful way.
That's true. Every death has a sort of ritual significance, right? I guess
2 cents.
Maybe apart from Josh's, perhaps at first. Although it would seem to it would maybe oh no, maybe not though, because he's sort of planted.
They plant him.
Sort of way. He's planted, and he has a little sort of rune on his foot.
Yeah, and I know what that rune means.
So what does that mean?
So that rune is made up by Ari Aster, and it basically means go to come back again.
Fascinating.
So it's kind of a little like infinity symbol, like a rune stylized infinity symbol.
Right.
And Dani's 2 runes that are used to describe her, and they're on her. They're on the shirt that they make her. Ari Aster said in an interview that basically her runes mean run to get back home. You like running away to leave on a journey only for the journey to take you back to where you are. And then I also know that in the director's cut, there's a scene that was cut from the theatrical release where a little boy says to Dani, "What's brave is going home."
That would have been a bit on the nose, I think. I'm glad that that's not in there, to be honest. I think I know the kid. I know the kid that would be in that scene. It's weirder that the kid doesn't say anything.
You have to go to come back home.
You must go back home.
How can we understand her as
Hey,
going
Yoda.
back home at the end? Is that something that you see as
To
fitting?
herself.
Oh, the home within.
The home that is within.
Oh,
Damn.
sort of. I've got a different reading. Dav, you had an understanding of death in the film, right?
I think. So the only thing that was troubling me was the death of the outsiders for a long time, and I think that's a really, really competent reading that you've done. And I think probably
Thank you.
a really, I think the one that I had was a much more surface level one. And I think because I was seeing things like you talked about, talking about taboos, and it becomes clear that either there are different interpretations of the information that they're being given. Taboo is an incest. Incest is a taboo, and even we have limits. Against the very next scene, someone saying, "Oh, literally, we do practice incest. That's what the oracle is. The oracle is a result of incest." So there was part of me that was maybe looking for a reading that the community isn't as sort of isn't as much of one organism as it might appear.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe there's sort of dissenting voices, or perhaps there are sort of different interpretations of the information they're being given. So I think that the idea of everyone having a part in everyone having a part to play is a much more engaging one. But at first, I wanted to believe that there were certain members of the cult who simply viewed these people as a threat and didn't think that they had any place other than just to be murdered, and then conveniently they can play some part in the ritual later on.
I think you're so on the money with that, and I think that at the halfway point of the film, there's this tension when they say that the book had gone missing because
They're lying.
well, are they lying, or is there some shenanigans going on within the Horga themselves? Because I think there's definitely this feeling that the cult is not as unified as I think they are at one point. Because it could, a part of me feels like maybe there's this character that you can see in the final shots when they're doing that mass mourning of the burning people, and she's got like a red horn. It kind of looks like a giant chili pepper.
But it's not Maya.
It's not Maya. Maya's wearing like a red dress.
And red lipstick, yeah.
And this girl's got like a weird hat on, and she's got a cut on her nose.
Oh, I didn't notice
It's like she's been in a fight.
Is this not the girl who led Josh away?
It might be her, yeah. So I feel like there's like what we don't really get knowledge of is whatever the fool game is. It's clearly some violent.
Yeah, because you get the idea that she is like romantically interested in Josh, and then after Josh commits the fault of peeing on the tree, it seems that it's mainly the older male members of the cult that are most annoyed about that. And to me, maybe what takes place is them coercing her to lead Josh away so that they can then make him the fool. And I don't know whether that is something she would have been willing to do, like as a younger cult member who actually wanted to sleep with Josh, I think.
Yes.
Like
So I think that there is, I think that there was like a rebellious element to her, because her intentions to have sex with Josh, which I'm reading into the film, weren't supported by the cult. You know, she didn't get any kind of like mating sex right. So ultimately they use her as a pawn to lead Josh away because he's angered the elders.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some like, at least like tension or friction in the different members of the cult you could read into it.
She also didn't have permission to breed, remember, because Maya does have permission.
Yeah, so
Right, you
exactly.
have to have permission. You have to have
And can you
consultation
imagine, like, it's a hot summer's day, you're a young, beautiful Swedish woman, and you don't have permission? Like, I would end up with a cut on my nose for sure.
I feel like the thing is, though, the cult can disagree. I think that's kind of what they're saying is that, like, again, everybody has their part, and it's almost like transgression within the society is just part of the society. You know, they had a uniform already picked out for her. She's not kicked out or cast out. She's not even, she's not killed, because I don't think death is a punishment in this society. You know, so she's not killed. It's just part of her story that she broke the rules once, you know, and so she has to wear this weird outfit and she's got a cut in her nose. There's a super dark reading, and I'm sure I saw this on someone else's website. I wish I had the reference, but there's a super dark reading that the cuts on her nose are actually from Mark.
Oh.
Yeah. And that basically he is just like a jerk, and you know that you can kind of infer that basically he got too rough with her, and
so that they did sleep together.
And perhaps the Oracle interceded. I don't know.
Or maybe she's not allowed to sleep with him, so she let him off just for like some heavy petting in the midsummer sun. He then tried to force it, and then that's
why he was,
the cult interceded to flay him for his like sexual transgressions or something. But yeah, that's not my reading. I wanted to say that one thing about the Aster cinematic universe. May I?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Are you going to talk about Sunlight?
I'm going to talk about Hereditary.
Yeah, well, I really want to talk about those sun shadows that appear in Hereditary, and they seem to evoke, is it Palamon?
Yes.
Every time
I don't remember
we
this.
get...
What is that?
Well, so Palamon is like the demon god that the cult worships in Hereditary, and you can see throughout the film glimmer of sun whenever Palamon's energy is around. So when the protagonist is in his classroom and he like smashes his head, I think previous to that he's seen the glimmer of sunlight before his face turns strange. You can see it in his bedroom. Like, so we do get these little like clues to like a sort of supernatural entity.
Yeah.
And in Midsommar, those same glimmers take place. They shine on Maya's face before she leads Christian off for the sex ritual. So there's this kind of like eerie environmental cohesion with the cult through like light shadows,
I am such a
alluding
fan.
to something bigger than us, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, in Hereditary, you could probably read that film pretty safely as being, the evil forces were actually real.
They were actually real.
Yeah.
So there's
They
like,
were actually real.
you know, in terms of them like worshipping this sun god with the sacrifice at the end, that kind of thing, you know, wow, why are these humans behaving in this way? This is so weird. Well, there is a tiny allusion to there being like something else.
If his third film isn't similarly to do with like the the cults and gods and humanity and the potential like crossover between ancient gods and humans again, like I'll be so upset if he abandons this, because like I've seen all these connections between the two films that I absolutely adore. Heather, you brought up that in the final sacrifice scene of Midsommar, there's this body made out of twigs. Mm-hmm. And I think that the body made out of twigs is the male...
In the temple, you mean?
In the temple at the end, is the male that did the Ada Stupa that jumped off the cliff.
You're right. Mm-hmm.
When you see the Palamon statue at the end of Midsommar, it's similarly made out of those twigs.
Oh, yeah.
And also the little girl in Midsommar makes lots of things out of twigs in the same way. Mm-hmm. And it's just this like little connection. But then that brings us more clearly to the theme.
Sorry, you mean the little girl in Hereditary makes things out of twigs?
But that brings us more clearly to a theme of reincarnation in Aster's films that I think is super cool.
That's right, because the little girl is actually reincarnated Palamon.
She's got Palamon in her, and Palamon doesn't like being in a female host, which is why they decapitate her to get Palamon to possess her brother.
That's right.
Because he's not comfortable being in a female body. He's just a dick, really, which I also love, because he's the trickster god, so he's just an asswipe. But you have that theme of reincarnation that's in Midsommar, and then what you picked up on this time in Hereditary, but then what you picked up on this time watching Midsommar is that people treat Dani as if she's coming home.
That's right. Well, when you're talking about her runes being a coming home, I'm like, what are you talking about? She's never been there. So it's like, now I understand you're reading that Dani is
one of the Horga, always has been. Yeah.
And always has been.
And that's why she's the one that tries to speak Swedish to them. That's why she's
the only one that says tack at the beginning.
She's immediately welcomed by them. Like, they talk about how pretty she is.
Not to mention, she's also the main queen. Like, it turns out that she's the main queen. But this is kind of like a chosen one.
She is the chosen one.
Test of strength.
In her bedroom at the beginning, like, she has a lot of like spiritual elements in it. I can relate. Like, she's got a lot of plants, and she has this big tapestry above her bed, which Conor spotted is from a Swedish or Nordic fairy tale of a little girl with a bear. Yeah. So like, it seems that she's been searching in her American context for this like Scandinavian spirituality already. It's
so that would the Bear
speak
King,
to like
the Bear King Kalimon,
like ancestral memory, or like as far as reincarnated memory.
Yeah, so she has this kind of like this longing for this culture, which she never herself expresses. Like, she doesn't say to the guys like, "Oh, I've always wanted to go to Sweden" or anything like that. It's very dormant. But then I feel like, once again, that's the kind of point, is that nature has a way of balancing itself. It knows how to do it, and it doesn't need human consciousness. There's kind of a determinism in Aster's films, but I don't care. I think it's cool as fuck. I love it. It
work in horror film terms, I think.
It does. Yeah. Like, you see that kind of same like determinism.
There's no escaping our fate kind of thing.
Yeah, it's used in Cabin in the Woods. Like, things are so, it stretches the limits of probability so much that it's like, it just becomes fun and playful. So I feel like, in a way, like, Aster Aster is Palimon. He's got this like little box of people that he gets to play with and do whatever he wants with in his films, and makes these like wonderful stretches of the imagination to allow these things to happen. I don't know. So I'm hoping the third film continues these themes of reincarnation and maybe ties them together somehow.
I'm personally hoping he does it in a film that is tonally very different.
Yeah, want him to go tonally different again.
Be?
Yeah. Because like the beginning of Midsommar is so similar in like color palette.
That's true.
To Hereditary. Mm-hmm. I would love the next film to begin like very similar to Midsommar, like to have those like shocking yellows and blues and white.
Yeah.
And then to go, I don't know, maybe into like neons or something, like go into Color Out of Space type territory or something. I don't know. Oh yeah, he needs to do a space movie.
By the time Aster's third movie comes out, we don't have a name for this trilogy. Do you know what I mean?
Aster Cinematic Universe.
I had a final question, actually. So the Oracle child kind of links back to Hereditary as like a child with quite a deformed and unusual face. So that definitely like builds upon his universe. But in terms of their role in the movie, I struggled to find anything with depth to it, and I feel like maybe they were only present to mislead people in the trailer that it was a horror film and occlude the breakup element, which we get. I mean, do you think that the Oracle child offers anything more within the film, or do you think they're just there to like symbolically tie up the Aster universe?
I don't know. I think they serve the Oracle in Midsommar serves as a kind of, a figure who is involved in the community but somehow detached from it. I think because you always see the Oracle, you always shown the Oracle alone but observing. Mm-hmm. I think there's this sort of element of they're a sort of shadow. They're just sort of watching over just whatever happens in the commune. Mm-hmm. Almost as a sort of, but sort of forbidden from actually intervening, perhaps. Mm-hmm. But then I guess they do at one point in the film, but they're not actually the one to swing the. Because I'm thinking of the scene where Josh tries to sort of take a picture of the sacred
They're
text.
still just observing, even when we're in a flayed outsider. But I just find that there's not that much more to them, and that's okay.
Can I point out that he's Daffy Ducking in that scene?
Oh, he's not wearing any pants?
He wears his hoodie and his t-shirt.
Daffy Duck and his Donald Duck, and Daffy wears a dress. Get it right.
Oh no, Daffy the crazy black one.
Daffy doesn't wear anything.
Yeah, he's totally naked all the time.
He's totally nude.
Daisy Duck.
Oh, Daisy.
But Donald also doesn't wear trousers.
But Donald doesn't wear trousers, but he does wear a shirt.
He wears a shirt. It's not that
Donald
long,
Ducking.
He's Donald Ducking.
Donald Ducking. Anyway, guys.
Daffy Ducking would be no shirt.
We've got to wrap this one up. So the Oracle.
This one I got good as well.
He's there for the trailer, or is he adding anything more? What do you think?
I think he does add something. I think that there's something in Aster's films about special children and the ability to see beyond. I think there are meant to be people in the film that are more connected to, the kind of the Jungian collective unconscious, or those creatures of the dark that really do exist and that sometimes permeate into human reality. There are some people out there that are able to see those things.
Yeah.
I think
sorry, go on.
I think it's kind of unfortunate that Aster chooses physical deformity, or even, so physical deformity in Midsommar, and then just kind of a distinctive face in Hereditary, because there's nothing, there's no deformity there. It's just, it not at all in any way. They just have a striking, he just chose a very striking young actress to play that part. And so trying to signal with like a physical look, I think is a little bit shallow. But again, I think he's a really playful director, and I also think he's just figuring this stuff out.
But if he's trying to mislead people with the genre, like it kind of works to like signal one thing.
Yeah.
and then deliver something else in the film. Like, I kind of think that's what took place. Like, and maybe that speaks to why a lot of people thought it was going to be a much more horror affair than it was, a much scarier film than it was. And maybe that's just part of the joke of it as well, like that he plays on people.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we're in a sort of like post Guillermo del Toro world now. You know, we know to trust monsters almost. Like, we know that.
Yeah, we almost know to try and relate with them at least.
Yeah. The monster's probably not going to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
Awesome. The monster's probably not the bad guy. I think that's it.
500 Days of Midsommar. I had a quick point that I wanted to throw in. So thank you to everybody that watched the show last week. Really, really great that people are taking the time to listen to our little podcast. It means the world to me at any rate. I don't know if you guys care.
I hate that people listen to this.
I'm ambivalent about it.
It means the world to me. We got a really great comment from my good friend Graham, who pointed out that there are actually a lot of reasons why you would compare the creation of Perfect Blue to Walt Disney, that the Japanese animation structures that were in place in that period were our post-war Japan were actually very similar and adopted from the Disney Corporation. So that comment that I used, that it seemed kind of ridiculous to make the Hitchcock meets Disney comparison, actually it made a lot of sense.
Mimi looked like Mima looked like Cinderella characters, so
well, apparently there's a reason for that. Yeah, apparently they were adopting the Disney style.
I think if we
get enough of these corrections, we need to actually have a correction section at the very end. That would be quite cool.
Well, that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping people will continue to tell us about all the things that we
tell
screw
me
up.
Off.
Exactly.
I don't like to correct myself. I'm really happy that someone will do it for me. Thank you, Graham.
Amazing. So do we have any idea what's coming up next week?
Well, so I'm choosing the film next week. I'm wondering whether it should be Fire Walk with Me.
I think so.
I'd really enjoy
I would love
that.
for it to be Fire Walk with Me. It's one of my favourite movies. I don't know that I want to touch it, in case it's ruined.
But since we now live in a Lynchian universe, 2020 is Lynch's year for sure.
Maybe that's the one then. Maybe it's going to be Fire
I think
Walk
it's time.
with Me. Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Okay. See you guys next week.
See you next week.
Thanks very much, guys. Bye.